My name is Franklin Davis, and I'm 75 years old. For most of my life, I worked as a quality control supervisor at a manufacturing plant in Ohio. I wasn't wealthy, but I was careful with money. I saved every penny I could, invested wisely, and lived modestly in the same three-bedroom house I bought in 1978. My wife, Margaret, and I raised our two children there, Susan, now 45, and David, 42. Margaret passed away 5 years ago, and since then, I thought my kids and I had grown closer. I was wrong. The first sign something was off came during Thanksgiving dinner last year. I was slower getting around, needed help carrying the turkey, and had to sit down more often. Susan kept glancing at David with these looks I couldn't quite read. When I asked Susan to pass the cranberry sauce, she sighed heavily and said, "Dad, you're really having trouble with basic things, aren't you?" "I'm fine," I replied. "Just a little stiff from the cold weather." David leaned forward. "Dad, we've been talking. Susan and I think it might be time to consider your options." "What options?" I asked. "Well," Susan said, avoiding eye contact, "there are some really nice assisted living facilities around here. Professional care, activities, people your own age." The way she said people your own age made it clear I wasn't included in her definition of people worth being around. I set down my fork and looked at both of them. "I'm not ready for that conversation." "But Dad," David pressed, "what if something happens? What if you fall and no one's here to help? We worry about you." I should have seen through it then. The worry wasn't about my safety, it was about their convenience. But I still believed they cared. Over the next few months, the pressure intensified. They visited less frequently, called mainly to ask about my situation, and every conversation somehow circled back to assisted living. Susan would bring brochures. David would mention how much my house was worth in today's market. They started talking about me like I wasn't in the room. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. I had a minor fall in my bathroom. Nothing serious, just slipped on a wet tile. But when David arrived to check on me, he didn't ask if I was hurt. His first words were, "Dad, this proves what we've been saying. You can't live alone anymore." "I'm fine," I told him, showing him I could walk perfectly well. "No, you're not fine," he snapped. "You're becoming a burden and we can't keep dropping everything to worry about you." A burden. The word hit me like a physical blow. This man I'd raised, whose college tuition I'd paid, whose first car I'd helped him buy, was calling me a burden. Susan arrived an hour later with papers. "We've found a place," she announced. "Sunset Manor has an opening next week. We can have you moved in by Friday." "I'm not going anywhere," I said quietly. "Dad, you don't have a choice," Susan replied. "We're your family. We know what's best for you." That night, alone in my house, I made a decision. If they wanted to treat me like a burden, like someone whose life and choices didn't matter, then they were about to learn something about their old man they'd never suspected. See, what my children didn't know was that their burden of a father had been much smarter with money than they'd ever imagined. For 47 years, I'd been putting money aside. Not just in savings accounts, I'd been investing in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and even some real estate through a business trust I'd established back in 1985. My financial advisor, Thomas Brooks, had helped me structure everything legally and discreetly. The trust was ironclad, with specific instructions about who could access it and under what circumstances. My children's names weren't on any of the documents. Margaret knew about the trust, but we'd agreed to keep it private. We lived modestly by choice, not necessity. The old Ford pickup in my driveway, the second-hand furniture, the home repairs I did myself, it was all deliberate. We wanted to teach our kids the value of hard work and not to depend on inheritance. Looking back, maybe we taught them too well to underestimate their father. The trust was worth just over $2.3 million. After that Tuesday confrontation, I called Thomas Brooks. "Tom, I need you to review the trust documents. Specifically, the clauses about mental competency and family challenges." "Everything okay, Franklin?" he asked. "My kids want to put me in a home. They think I'm losing my grip, and I suspect they're more interested in my assets than my well-being." Tom was quiet for a moment. "The trust protects you completely. Even if they tried to claim incompetence, you'd need to be declared mentally unfit by 2 independent physicians and a judge. Plus, the trust has a clause requiring unanimous consent from 3 trustees to make any changes, and you're one of them. What if they try to access my regular accounts? They can't. You're the sole owner, and unless you give them power of attorney, or they get legal guardianship, they have no access. And Franklin, given what you've told me about your mental state, no judge would grant guardianship." I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. "Tom, I want you to prepare something for me. If they push this assisted living thing, I want them to know exactly what they're dealing with." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my children's behavior carefully. Susan came by 3 times, each visit focused on getting me to sign papers. She'd brought forms for power of attorney, medical directives, and something called a voluntary commitment to Sunset Manor. "Dad, you just need to sign these," she said during her Thursday visit. "We're trying to make this easy for you. I'm not signing anything until I review it with my lawyer," I told her. Her face changed. "Your lawyer? Dad, you don't need a lawyer. We're your family. We're looking out for you. Then you shouldn't mind if I have it reviewed." David's approach was different. He started showing up unannounced, checking my refrigerator, examining my mail, taking photos of what he called safety hazards around the house. He found a loose handrail and spent 20 minutes photographing it from different angles. "David, what are you doing?" I asked. "Building a case," he said, then caught himself. "I mean, documenting things that need to be fixed. For your safety." Building a case. Now I understood. They weren't just trying to convince me to leave. They were gathering evidence to force me out through legal channels. I called Tom again. "They're documenting everything. Taking pictures, making notes about my house, my habits. I think they're planning to petition for guardianship. Franklin, I need you to do something for me. I'm sending over a private investigator, someone who specializes in elder abuse cases. Her name is Patricia Williams. She's going to assess your situation and document your mental competency." Patricia Williams arrived the following Monday. She was a retired social worker in her 60s, sharp-eyed and thorough. For 3 hours, she put me through cognitive tests, memory exercises, and practical assessments. She evaluated my ability to manage finances, make decisions, and care for myself. "Mr. Davis," she said when we finished, "there's absolutely nothing wrong with your mental faculties. You're sharper than most people half your age. If anyone tries to claim incompetence, this report will shut them down immediately." "What about the house? My son's been photographing everything." She smiled grimly. "I've documented that too. Yes, you have a loose handrail and some minor maintenance issues. Every 75-year-old homeowner does. None of it suggests you're unable to live independently." That weekend, Susan and David came together. They had more papers and a new ultimatum. "Dad, we've scheduled a meeting with the people at Sunset Manor for Monday," Susan announced. "They're expecting you." "Cancel it," I said. "We're not canceling anything," David replied. "This has gone on long enough. You're moving next week, whether you like it or not." I looked at both of them. My children, the people I'd sacrificed for, worked overtime to support, stayed up nights worrying about when they were sick or troubled. Now they were treating me like a problem to be solved. "I see," I said quietly. "And you've thought this through completely?" "Dad, we've been thinking about nothing else for months," Susan said. "You can't take care of yourself anymore. The house is too big, too dangerous. You need professional care. And my finances, my assets, what happens to those?" They exchanged a look. David cleared his throat. "Well, we'd help you manage everything. Make sure your bills are paid, your accounts are handled properly." "How generous of you both." They left that evening, confident they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. Monday morning arrived, and so did Susan and David. They had a moving truck scheduled for Wednesday, and had already put a deposit down on the assisted living facility. What they didn't expect was Thomas Brooks sitting in my living room when they walked in. "Dad, who's this?" Susan asked, immediately suspicious. "This is my attorney, Thomas Brooks," I said calmly. "Tom, these are my children, Susan and David." Tom stood up, briefcase in hand. "Mr. Davis has asked me to review the legal documents you've been pressuring him to sign. I'm afraid there are some serious problems with your approach." David's face went red. "What kind of problems?" "Well, for starters, attempting to coerce an elderly person into signing legal documents under duress is considered elder abuse in Ohio. The photographs you've been taking of his property without permission could be construed as harassment. And this forced relocation you're planning, that's illegal detention." "We're his family," Susan protested. "We're trying to help him." Tom opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I have here a comprehensive mental competency evaluation conducted by a licensed social worker. Your father scored in the 95th percentile for cognitive function. He's perfectly capable of making his own decisions." "That's impossible," David said. "He can barely take care of himself." "According to whom?" Tom asked. "The same children who visit twice a month and spend most of their time photographing supposed safety hazards?" I watched my children's faces as Tom continued. The confident expressions they'd worn for months were cracking. "Furthermore," Tom said, "Mr. Davis has asked me to inform you that any further attempts to force him into an assisted living facility will result in a restraining order and potential criminal charges." Susan found her voice. "Fine. But what happens when he falls again? When he can't pay his bills? When he needs medical care? We're not going to be responsible for cleaning up his messes." "That's interesting," I said quietly, "because I don't recall asking you to be responsible for anything." David leaned forward. "Dad, be realistic. You're living on Social Security and whatever small pension you have. You can't afford to maintain this house forever. You certainly can't afford any kind of extended medical care." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I looked at Tom and nodded. "Actually," Tom said, "that brings us to another matter. Mr. Davis wanted you both to understand his true financial situation before you make any more assumptions about his capabilities." He handed each of them a document. I watched their faces as they read. Susan's mouth fell open. David's hands started shaking. "What the hell is this?" David whispered. "That's a summary of your father's assets," Tom explained. "The Franklin Davis Living Trust, established in 1985, currently valued at approximately $2.3 million, real estate holdings, diversified stock portfolio, municipal bonds, and liquid assets." Susan looked up at me, her face pale. "Dad, is this real?" "Very real," I replied. 47 years of careful investing and compound interest. Your mother and I lived modestly so we could build something substantial." "But why didn't you tell us?" David asked, his voice barely audible. "Because we wanted you to learn to stand on your own feet. We wanted you to value hard work and not depend on inheritance. But more importantly, we wanted to see what kind of people you'd become." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see the calculations running through their minds. All those months of treating me like a burden, like someone whose life didn't matter, and now they were learning I was worth more than both their houses combined. "Dad," Susan said carefully, "we had no idea. If we'd known—" "You'd have treated me differently," I interrupted. "You'd have shown respect for my choices. You'd have asked instead of demanded." David was staring at the trust documents. "So you could have afforded the best care all along, private nurses, a luxury facility, anything you wanted." "That's right. But I wanted to stay in my own home. I wanted my children to respect that choice. Instead, you called me a burden and tried to force me out." Tom cleared his throat. "There's one more thing you both should know. The trust has very specific instructions about distribution of assets. Mr. Davis maintains complete control during his lifetime. Upon his death, the trust will be distributed according to his wishes, which can be modified at any time." I watched Susan and David exchange panicked looks. They were finally understanding what they'd done. "Now," I continued, "about that meeting at Sunset Manor today. I won't be attending, and neither will you on my behalf. Tom has already called them to cancel any arrangements made without my consent. Dad, we can fix this, Susan said desperately. We were just worried about you. We love you. Do you? I asked, because the last few months haven't felt like love. They've felt like two people trying to get rid of an inconvenience. David stood up abruptly. This is insane. You've been lying to us for years about your finances. You let us think you were struggling. You made us feel guilty for not helping more. I never asked for your help, I said, and I never lied. I just didn't volunteer information you didn't need to know. So what happens now? Susan asked, tears starting to form. Now you both go home and think about what kind of relationship you want to have with your father. Because the old dynamic where you make decisions for me and treat me like I'm incompetent, that's over. After they left, Tom packed up his briefcase. That went better than expected, he said. Did it? I asked. Franklin, they showed their true colors when they thought you were vulnerable. Now they know you're not the helpless old man they imagined. The question is, what will they do with that information? I already knew the answer. People who show you who they really are rarely change just because circumstances do. The phone calls started that very evening. Susan called first, her voice shaking. Dad, I can't stop thinking about our conversation today. I realize we handled everything wrong. Can we talk? We just did talk, I replied. For months, in fact. You made your position very clear. But I didn't know about your financial situation. If I had... Susan, stop. The money doesn't change what you said to me. Doesn't change how you treated me. It just changes how you want to treat me now. David called an hour later. Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe we were too hasty about the assisted living thing. You seem to be managing fine on your own. I'm managing exactly as well as I was yesterday, David, and the day before that, and the day before that. I know. Look, why don't Susan and I take you out for dinner this weekend? We can talk about everything properly. I'm not interested in dinner. I'm interested in being treated with respect, and that ship sailed months ago. But they didn't give up. Over the next 2 weeks, I received daily calls, surprise visits, and even flowers delivered to my door. Susan brought a casserole she'd made herself, something she hadn't done in 10 years. David offered to fix my loose handrail, the same one he'd been photographing as evidence of my incompetence. The most pathetic attempt came when they both showed up together on a Saturday morning with a real estate agent. Dad, Susan said brightly, we thought maybe you'd like to look at some luxury condos. You know, something smaller but really high-end. With your resources, you could afford something beautiful. The real estate agent, a woman named Carol, smiled professionally. Mr. Davis, I've identified several properties that would be perfect for someone of your means. Dorman buildings, concierge services, maintenance-free living. And close to us, David added, so we can visit more often. I looked at the glossy brochures Carol had spread across my coffee table. Luxury condos downtown, starting at $800,000. Properties that would eat up a third of my trust just as a down payment. These are lovely, I said calmly. But I'm not interested. But Dad, Susan pressed, you could have the best of everything. Top floor views, modern amenities, security. I have everything I need right here. After they left, I called Tom. They're not giving up. Now they want me to buy an expensive condo. Closer to them, I assume? Exactly. And I suspect they think if I'm spending my money on luxury housing, there'll be less left for them to worry about inheriting. Tom was quiet for a moment. Franklin, I think it's time to make some changes to the trust. Permanently. That afternoon, I drove to Tom's office and signed new documents. The trust was restructured to leave the bulk of my assets to 3 charities, the American Red Cross, the local food bank, and a foundation that provided legal aid to elderly people facing family exploitation. Susan and David would each receive $50,000, enough to show I hadn't forgotten them entirely, but not enough to justify their recent behavior. I also established something else, the Franklin Davis Foundation for Elder Advocacy. It would be funded with $500,000 from the trust and dedicated to helping elderly people who were being manipulated or abused by their own families. 2 months later, Susan and David were still calling regularly, still trying to rebuild what they'd destroyed. But I'd made my peace with the situation. I hired a part-time housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, who came twice a week to help with cleaning and grocery shopping. I had a handyman, Jim, who maintained the house and yard. I was living comfortably, safely, and independently, exactly as I'd wanted to all along. The final conversation came on a Tuesday evening in July. Susan called, and for the first time in months, she sounded genuinely sad instead of desperate. "Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to say it. I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not about the money, not about the inheritance, but about how we treated you. You deserved better from us." "Yes, I did," I said simply. "Is there any way we can fix this? Any way to earn back your trust?" I considered her question carefully. "Susan, trust isn't something you earn back. It's something you build over time through consistent actions. The question is, are you willing to put in that time without any guarantee of reward?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you willing to have a relationship with your father just because he's your father? Not because of what he might leave you, not because of what he can do for you, but just because." She was quiet for a long moment. "I think so. I hope so. Then we'll see. But Susan, understand this. Things will never go back to the way they were. I'm not the same man who let you bulldoze over his wishes. I'm not the same man who stayed quiet when you called him a burden. I understand. Good, because I'm 75 years old, and I'm done wasting time on people who don't respect me, even if they're my own children. A year later, I'm still living in my house. Mrs. Rodriguez has become a good friend, and Jim's teenage son cuts my grass for $20 a week. I've had dinner with Susan 3 times, actual conversations, not sales pitches. David still calls, but less frequently, and he stopped bringing up my living situation. The Franklin Davis Foundation has helped 12 elderly people fight inappropriate guardianship proceedings. That gives me more satisfaction than any family dinner ever could. I learned something important through all of this. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who respect you the least. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't hurting them back. It's simply refusing to let them hurt you anymore. My trust is secure, my legacy is meaningful, and my dignity is intact. At 75, I finally learned to value myself as much as I valued everyone else. It only took my own children treating me like garbage to figure that out. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.